Welcome to today's webcast from Range 4 and IBM. Today we're going to be talking about application release automation, in particular using IBM's UrbanCode tool and focusing on how it works with IBM's MQ and message broker middleware solutions. So Mark Roberts is going to be doing the presentation and the demonstration today. Mark, would you like to say hello?
Hello everyone, and good afternoon.
So you should now have presentation rights. Yeah, there we go.
Okay. So, can you now see my screen, Helen, with the first slide on it?
Yeah.
Super. Okay, right. We'll carry on from here. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's webcast. I want to give you an introduction to IBM WebCode Deploy first. So we'll start off with that and go through a few of the deployment challenges that we see customers facing at the moment when we go out and talk to customers about this particular area of the software development lifecycle. So we'll then go on to a demonstration of the product, showing you how it can deploy and manage the deployment process. And we'll focus in a little bit on some of the technologies that Helen mentioned around the WebSphere technologies. So we won't be showing all of that today, but what we will show is the capabilities of the product in terms of what it can do in those particular areas. And as always with this, each customer is different in their deployment requirements and in their deployment strategy. So the best approach to understanding how this can have an impact on your specific deployment areas is to get involved with a proof of concept on the product or one of the DevOps assessments that Range 4 offer, and that will certainly help you to understand how you can take advantage of these products to improve your the resilience of your DevOps scenario. And it's a question really, first off, is what sort of things are you trying to improve about how you currently deploy software? Because most of the customers we talk to, I think pretty much, in fact, all of them, have a deployment capability right now. And yet they're still interested in talking to us about how they can change that deployment process and improve it. And for a lot of customers, the improvement areas they're looking for really revolve around things that go over and above the general sort of scripted operations that they have for deployments today. Many people will use shell scripts for deployments, or they'll be using some variety of different software products plugged together. But what that often doesn't provide is the level of security control and governance and audit trail that they and their auditors are looking for. So it tends to be sort of adding that value on top of the development and deployment processes that people already have that is the areas where they want to improve. The other area that people look for is sort of a straight through software development lifecycle, whereby you take a requirement through implementation, through test, and that's where a lot of software development lifecycles stop. So a lot of organizations now are looking to extend continuous integration and continuous build processes into continuous deployment as well. And that's what people tend to be looking for these days. So a little bit of an introduction in terms of the sorts of things that we see and the sorts of things customers are asking us for, some of the reasons why customers come to us to talk about this particular technology area. So another driver for this really is the compression of the software development lifecycle. So we've seen waterfall processes for many years where we had discrete phases of behavior going through requirements, design, code, unit test, and so on. And that was all well and good for some technologies many years ago, but hasn't really been able to keep pace with the rapid change in technology that we have. So many plates people are spinning and trying to keep in the air now that doing it all in one complete cycle and then looking at the result doesn't really make a lot of sense. So the move towards agile delivery processes and agile development has compressed these phases together and has created this crossover area between development and operations, lovingly known as DevOps. So it's the interface really between these two environments, and It's worth going over this at the beginning because a lot of customers we meet often say, well, you come to talk to us about DevOps. What does that mean? What is DevOps? What's your view? Well, in our view, really, it's the interface between the development and the creative behaviors of creating applications and the operations team that apply that procedural rigor to make sure that systems operate as they should and organizations stay off the front page of the newspapers and continue to serve their customers in the way that they want to. Now, some of the issues that we meet show up in a variety of different ways, and whilst we'll often meet customers who describe themselves as agile, when we ask them really how long it would take to push an urgent change to an application through their life cycle and get it out into production, the answers can often be into many, many weeks, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks. And that doesn't really seem to be keeping pace with the theories and the ideals of agile development. So some of the challenges that we see really not necessarily related to the things sitting above these 4 items, but we have large numbers of customers experiencing delays in development processes, deployment problems, production delays and rollbacks. The one thing that's not listed on there is the fact that approximately 50% of all deployments are rolled back a day or 2 later. And that's a huge waste in effort and time and a lot of aggravation for people to deal with. So a lot of areas really where people can improve, and that improvement really needs to come from looking at the content that is being deployed and the throughput that we have and looking at how we're actually carrying out those deployment processes. So some of the delivery challenges that we have in software development these days have been that software development life cycle, going through from gathering information from your customers, communicating that with the line of business and looking at what the requirements are, moving that through into development and test, and finally pushing it through into the operational area. And there are really 2 gaps within that particular life cycle that have caused us pain over the last few years. Now, the first gap is something that we've addressed quite well with agile development, because that has brought in members of the business community, our stakeholders, into the project, and that has allowed us to get better visibility of what they really want. So iterative development by its nature means that we'll be able to show our stakeholders versions of the application as it evolves and get immediate feedback, which is very useful. The other thing that's helped to address that really has been traceability through the life cycle and trying to look at ways where we can relate together the requirements, the implementation artifacts, and the tests, so we can see immediately how we're implementing that particular requirement, how we're validating that requirement, how we're validating that work in progress. And I just want to give you a quick example really of this in context collaboration to show you the sort of things I mean. And this also impacts really, shows a good example of the mindset shift that needs to take place to take on some of these newer technologies. So here we've got the new world of requirements management. It's not Microsoft Word, and that's the biggest shock for a lot of people. And moving away from those technologies into something like this, which is a purely web-based solution for managing requirements, is a cultural change. And I meet customers on sites very frequently who look at this, and their body language is not one of immediate acceptance. It's skepticism, and it's really a view of, is this the right thing to do? Can we really work in this way? Can we throw away our documents? But here what we have is 2 people, Marco and Bob, having a conversation about a specific detail of a requirement. And as we select that particular discussion that's taking place on the right-hand side in the web browser here, we can see the detail, the exact line that they're discussing has been highlighted with a little orange-colored box around it. And that's focusing the attention immediately on that. And it does 2 things for us. 1, it gets an answer very quickly, and 2, it keeps the answer in the context of where it was discussed and where the decision was made. So 2 months later, when we come back to look at this again, which we invariably will do, we have the discussion there straight away, and we don't have to go around the loop again saying, does paper still need to be mailed out to customers in terms of invoices? So what I'm trying to communicate here really is that we can take bold steps and we can take action to make really significant changes in the cultural ways that we develop software and the ways that we interface with different layers within the organization. So let's think about the second gap now, which is DevOps. And this is really the gap that we see between the development team and operations. Now, agile development has done some great things, but I think you can probably start to see the flaw in this slide very quickly. In that with a lot of agile teams, they will say, we're building every minute. We build as soon as code gets delivered by a developer, and that's great. And it demonstrates something that a lot of teams frankly struggle with, which is that they can build their application, they can integrate it into a final executable, but it's something that can be deployed. It's not something that is being deployed. So we have this big funneling effect where the vast majority of the builds that are done, whilst they have value in showing that that can be done and that tests might be executed, they're not being deployed into production-like environments. So they're not being deployed into anything that is representative of how it's going to be used in production. Consequence of that is that we really don't know whether that code has been implemented correctly. And we only have a degree of confidence that the tests we've done on it demonstrate that it has actually been done right. So the proof is in the eating later on. And that's a little bit further down the cycle when it can actually be deployed. So if we do have these long delays in deployments, then the work stacks up, the testing effort stacks up in when we finally do get to deploy something, and ultimately things will be missed, errors will not be detected, or errors will be detected, but that was stuff that was worked on 3 or 4 weeks prior. So people have forgotten what they've done, and it's not really conducive to rapid turnaround, rapid change, and to getting things done in the most efficient manner. Now, how do we bring together the development and the operations environments? Well, the focus area really is often around testing. And whilst you're accelerating the amount of deployments you do, that also puts a huge strain on the test environments that you have within the organization. And for many organizations, the cost of testing is actually can be measured by some of the costs that are incurred with external systems. So if you do things like postcode lookups, you have to pay the post office every time you do a postcode lookup. So if you're doing testing activities, that costs you money. Some of the financial systems have very, very narrow windows of opportunity when organizations can test. So the consequence of that is that then starts to have an impact on your ability to test the deployed applications. So ultimately, our DevOps scenario starts to break down. It either costs us far too much money because we want to do a lot more testing because we can deploy faster, or you hit another bottleneck. So it's the age-old thing, in removing one bottleneck, we quickly accelerate up to the next bottleneck. So one of the ways around this really is virtualization. And it brings in some other technologies that we have that are not going to be discussed really today, other than to mention them at this point, which is if you are accelerating how quickly you get to production-like environments, you can then start to stub out these external systems and stub out internal systems and virtualize some of these external systems that are costly, that have a narrow window of opportunity to use them, and effectively remove them from the testing activity by creating a stub that is going to replace them. Now, ultimately, you will have to do some testing against the real live systems at some point, but we can do an awful lot of effort, an awful lot of testing effort in one of these virtualized environments early on, such that we don't have such a reliance on those costly systems that are hard to get hold of. So, some principles and values of DevOps really that we put together. Well, automated deployments to test environments. We need to automate that as much as possible so that instead of just having continuous build processes, we have a continuous delivery process into the first environment that you're going to test in. You're not going to do continuous delivery into production, obviously, but you can do that into your early environments whereby you are doing some early testing. This will generate some confidence in the application, and it will generate some confidence in your ability to deploy as well. So it removes some of the human variability and gives you a better granularity over what you're deploying. Now, removing human variability is one of the key factors here, because customers often describe to me the fact that they will have a Word document that describes the operations to be performed, and it says at step 72 you're going to do this. It's very easy for people to miss things out, to forget things, and there's no real clear demonstration that, or record that those things have been done properly. So automating things and removing that human variability is very important. Testing production-like environments. Well, I've just been describing really how we can use virtualized environments for testing, but also you do need to use real databases, real systems, such that you can demonstrate that you have an application that's going to do what it should do. And document the strategy automatically. Now, providing a full audit trail of all the deployments is very important so that people can look back historically and see what was deployed where and when. In a rollback scenario, that's particularly important so that you can figure out exactly what point you need to go back to. And hopefully rollbacks will diminish and reduce in number as a result of improving the deployment capability. And treat deployment as part of the development lifecycle. We have to get away from this throw it over the wall scenario whereby people think it's someone else's problem, or the deployment is for that team over there to focus on, and we don't know who they are and we don't talk to them. And we've got to get away from that. And the architectural awareness and understanding of how the various components that are being produced get deployed is really, really important as well, so that people really understand the architecture of the application that they're deploying. And with that understanding, they can hopefully make better informed decisions. So we put together this sort of sliding scale, really, of continuous delivery adoption. It's not yet another sort of maturity measure or anything like that, but it's really just the steps that people typically go through to automate as much as possible through their delivery process. And if we look at the start of this common source code control, well, pretty much everybody has a common source code control capability. We do meet a lot of customers that have 2, 3, or 4 different systems that they've used over time that are still in place. But for a lot of teams, there will be commonality across how the source code is actually managed and controlled. Moving that forward then into automated builds and the continuous build definitions. A lot of teams will have an automated build process linked into some continuous integration. So as soon as code is delivered into source code control, it gets built automatically. But then extending that forward, and sort of the bottom half really of this is the part that not many organizations have in place today. Starting to put in place automated delivery so that we automatically deliver the code, the applications, into an execution environment, our first environment, so that we can start to do some real proper testing on it. So that's our continuous delivery to test. And then continuous delivery to production-like environments when the tests have been passed and when we're happy with it and we put some sort of quality markers on it. And finally, continuous delivery route through to production. So there's a clearly defined route that things will go through. Takes away a lot of the paperwork, a lot of the manual processes that people need to go through to get a change into production. A customer told me the other day that they measured with a ruler the pile of paper on the desk that has to be produced to get a change deployed into production. And when they said 28 centimeters, I was picturing with my fingers, but I realized I was actually picturing 28 millimeters. And now I asked the guy again, and he said 28 centimeters. That's a foot of paper piled up on the desk that needs to be produced to deploy into production. And that's a staggering volume, and there's huge scope there to remove some of those processes, to automate, to incorporate some of the approval steps and reviews that need to be done to still satisfy an auditor that the same level of quality control and rigor has been applied, but huge swathes of cost have been removed from the organization by improving that. So the product that we're going to focus on today, this afternoon to have a look at in a second, is UrbanCode Deploy. Now this is the deployment automation product, and that's probably enough to say there on that. And what I'll now do is go straight into the product. So I'm going to flip across to this particular virtual machine. I'll unlock it, and just to check, can you see that on screen now, Helen? Not sure whether I had to do anything to change the screen over to make sure you could see this. Let me just see, actually.
Sorry, I was on mute for a moment there.
So I could see what you're looking at as well. I figured out how to do it in the top right corner of the screen, yes.
Okay, good.
So here's UrbanCode Deploy. It's purely web-based from the point of view of the user interface. Well, it does have a command line interface as well for anybody that wants to use it. If you want to incorporate it into scripts, then it has a command line. It also has a REST interface that can be used to incorporate it into other systems as well. At the top of the tree, really, the first thing to understand is an application. And I have an application here, imagine it to be called application 2. And within that particular application, there are 2 environments. So this application, it could be something really simple and small, or it could be a complete internet banking application with everything that encompasses and all the different systems that are involved. But that is the notion of what an application is. Now, an application is made up of a number of components, and you can see that we have a components tab on here across all the information that describes this particular application. Let's go to the components tab, and we can see that this particular application has just one component, and it's called WebSphere MQQs. And I'll let you guess what that's going to do. So if we go back to the environment for a second, we can start to see the environments that this one will progress through. It hasn't really got a complete set because it doesn't have anything on production, but it's just got 2 environments here really for development and QA that we're going to deploy into. So those will represent some physical machines that we're going to deploy to. We'll have a look at those in a second. We'll just finish off browsing around the application first and have a look at what it's going to do. Now, an application has a process, and it may have a number of processes, and this one has something that, just a second. This one has 2 processes. The first is going to create a queue, and the second is going to remove it. And the first one, when we're creating queues, is going to use some specific detailed operations that we have that support MQ. The removal is probably going to, I think it's just using some command line scripts that are created to use some of the command line capabilities within MQ to do some of the removing. Windows is asking me something. Let's just get rid of that. So if we have a look at the create queue process in here, it's very simple. Application processes are by their nature very simple. And this one, all it does is it calls out to the component deploy MQ, and it's going to install MQ queues. So if we have a look at the detail of it, it uses the WebSphere MQ queues component, and it uses a process within that component. So we have applications that reference components, and as they do so, they pick a specific component process that has the very fine-grained details in it to perform the actions that we actually want. Now, you can actually data chain lots of these together. We can drag on other things that we want to do. Let me just give this a name for a second. And I could now then just take that arrow off, draw a line across to there and a line across to there. And I've now introduced another process to do something else. Similarly with this, what I can do is I can run these things in parallel if I want to. So now the start will go down that route and that route at the same time, and it will run these 2 processes at the same time. So there's various things that you can do here to manage the orchestration of the components. And as I say, if you've got a very, very large application, it would be made up of many, many components. So you need to decide what the order is of executing the deployments of each of those components, and you need to decide which things can be done in parallel, if that's of benefit to you at all. So let's take that off. As soon as I quit out of this, it's going to warn me that I've made some changes, but I don't want to save those changes. But just having a quick look at the create queue and the remove queue operates in a very similar way. Now, if we look at our environment, we can drill down into the environment and we can see what has been deployed there in the past, and obviously some content has been deployed to this one previously. We can start to compare between environments as well. So I can take my development environment, compare it to QA, and it immediately shows me that that particular version has been deployed to development, but hasn't yet been deployed to QA. If I had different versions there that have been deployed, say an older version in QA, then I'd have another line on there and it would show me that as well. So let's just have a quick look at the resources that are involved in this particular environment. So if I go through to open up the resource for my development environment, we can see that it picks a particular machine called Agent 85. It's a development machine, and it's in resource group A. So we can use a hierarchy to group our resources together into a variety of different ways Let me show you that in a little bit more detail now. So if we look at this here, we can see that in what I've called resource group A, we've got agent 73, which happens to be offline at the moment. That's a different virtual machine that's running on, but it's not running on here at the moment. Agent 85 is online and running, and on agent 85, we've decided that we're going to deploy those two components to it. So let's go and have a look at my component in a little bit more detail now. So if we go and have a look at my WebSphere MQQ's component in here. I'm in the resource. You go to the component. Sorry, that's the wrong one. There we go. That's the component. So if we look at the component, we can see that it has some configuration information here, and it also has some process information that we need to specify. So let's have a look at the process first, because we were just looking at the application process. Let's go down now to the detail of looking at one of these component processes, and immediately see that there's a bit more detail about this one. And this is where we start to see some of the details that the product provides for supporting the specific technologies that we've been talking about. So we've been talking about using WebSphere MQ, and that's what we have in this one here. Now down the left-hand side, we have a much bigger selection of available plugin steps that we can use within the component. So for a component, we will be wanting to do things like we have there, creating queues, starting queues, deploying broker files, manipulating properties files, expanding gear files and war files, modifying files within there and then recompressing them back together. There's a variety of different things that we want to do at the fine-grained detailed level that you can probably think of right now that you're doing as part of your deployment process. But the question is, how are you doing them? How visible is it, those operations you're performing, and how easy is it to change them? And what is the impact of changing them? So we could encapsulate everything that we have on screen at the moment for this deployment of this particular operation within a shell script. And yes, that would be possible. But we would probably have things like hard-coded IP addresses or trying to introduce some variability to it, which is not always easy. And we would certainly have something that is not immediately obvious to everyone what's happening. But hopefully this is. So here we start, we go through and create a new queue manager, we start the queue manager, we configure the queue, start the queue manager service, and then verify that it's been done properly and the queue manager and the listener are running. So let's have a look at some of these steps that are involved in this particular deployment for an MQ and see what it's doing for us. Well, if we have a look at the Create Queue Manager, we're using a particular step, and the variables that we have within here on this property form for that particular step are specific to creating a new queue manager. So not surprisingly, it wants the queue name, and we can give it an optional description if we want to. We can also supply additional arguments if we want to. And if you float the mouse over these tooltips, over here, these question marks, it will show you a little bit more detail if there is any real relevant detail to provide for that particular step. What we also can do down here is we can set things to be done before and after this particular step. So we can have a precondition. And a precondition can be a script. It can be any type of script you want. It just has to return a 0 or a 1, a 0 being success and a 1 being failure. And if we get a success indicator for a precondition, it will continue. We can also set a post-processing script. This is done slightly differently in that with a post-processing script, we define the script elsewhere, or we can hit new on here and create a new post-processing script. Post-processing scripts can be reused across many different steps within UrbanCode deploy. So you can start to create a library of post-processing scripts to do significant validation operations that you need to perform, or any other type of post-processing that you want to do. You need to be careful though. You don't include in there things that really should be done as another step, but they can be useful to do something like a customer asked this morning about firing off information into external log collectors that they have. Well, if you want to do that type of thing, you would probably do it on a post-processing script, because that script has access to all of the input, all of the output, and all of the results that come out of running that particular step. The final thing to explain on here is user impersonation. And here we've ticked the box to say user impersonation. We've put a username in of MQM, and we've clicked use sudo. So that's something that's been set up on the machine where we're running the agent, where our target where we wish to deploy to, and we've allowed the MQM user to operate under sudo control, and as a result we can perform that operation. So let's go and find that particular step over here, because if you're constructing one of these processes, you're going to be picking operations from this palette of things over here on the left-hand side. So let's just have a look at some of these about what's available, and then we'll go and have a look at some of the steps that are available in some of the plugins in a little bit more detail in a second. So I've got utility steps. We can do things like acquiring and releasing locks. So if you're worried about two people starting off a long-running process that's going to have the potential to trip over each other, you can create a lock at the start and give it a name. And if it can't acquire the lock for a second user who tries to invoke the same process, it will just sit there and wait for the lock. So that's a great way to control sort of the queuing up of people behind critical resources or critical operations. If we look at application server for Java, we've got a number of application servers that we support. So we support Tomcat, and we have a list of things we can do there, such as stop and start and deploy. But under WebSphere, what we have is a huge list of commands that we can perform. And we'll have a look through that list in a second, because if some of you are deploying to WebSphere products, WebSphere application server, then you will be familiar with what's in that list, and you'll probably see things that you're already performing on the WebSphere platform. If we look down in the middleware area, we've got the WebSphere MQ over here, which is what we've used to create this one. So if we look at something like Create Queue Manager, if we wanted to create another one, we drag and drop that step on, let go there, and it just pops up a box and says, what is the queue manager name? Now, you may have spotted this earlier on as well. This, let me unhighlight it so you can read it. $curly bracket P colon, and then it says resource, and then WebSphere MQ.command path. Now, that is a resource parameter. It's been set on the specific resource. So it matters most to the agent machine that we deploy into, where WebSphere has been installed, so that we can find the commands. It's not really specific to the component. It's not a property of the component that says, well, for that component, we're expecting the WebSphere executables to be in this directory. For that version of that component, we're expecting the WebSphere executables to be somewhere else. So we set that as a resource parameter. Let me show you where that is. Let's just hop to another window and show you that resource parameter over here. So we go into our resource, look at the configuration, look at the resource properties, scroll down a little bit, and there it is, WebSphere MQ command path. So we set that once, and we say for that particular machine that exists at that particular location, the command path for WebSphere commands is there, and there are various others that have been set there as well. And let's have a look at another one here on the configuring of a queue. So if we focus in on this one for a second, now in this one what we've done is used a script data that exists within here, within the product, to define some further information, configuration information about the queue. So this will be familiar to you if you are involved with WebSphere MQ at all, and basically you encode the information in here. You can put variables in here. So in the same way that we saw the $curly bracket P colon variables, you could smother this with variables so that it becomes a standard piece of script text that you use across many different queue configurations. So that's that particular step. Let's have a look at just one more. When we come to start the queue, it asks us what the queue manager name is. Again, fairly obvious thing to do. There's various different things that we can use to perform operations on the MQ environment in there. Similarly for the message broker side of things as well. Now, I don't have an example to show you today of running message broker, but what we can do is we can set properties, set execution group properties, message flow properties, and we can start and stop flows. We can also perform deploy operations. So if I drag across this one, what this WebSphere message broker deploy operation is going to do is basically expect a list of bar files to be provided there. Some of the other properties you saw a second ago on the resource properties that we looked at are listed down here. So we've got the IP address of the machine that we are going to start the broker on, port to use, jar file path, and so on. The beauty of all this is that if you set these once globally in that particular resource, they are set for anything else that ever gets deployed into that particular environment. And this box will always start off the same way. So all you need to provide is the bar file's name and the execution group, and everything else has been taken care of for you. And if it does need to change, you change it in one location for that resource, and it will work for everything. Now, as you move on from one resource to another, we can be very, very confident that if we set up our resources correctly and we put the right information in there for these variable parameters, then our deployment processes become completely portable across those different environments. So we don't have the situation where people are effectively testing their production and deployment by deploying to production. That just doesn't happen. Now, I wanted to show you some of the other properties that are available for some of these specific technologies. So to do that, let's go through to our automation plugins and have a look at what we have for application deployment for WebSphere. But before I do that, actually, what I want to do is show you where you can find information about all of them. So let me just make sure that, yes, the screen is showing that. So I've just gone to a web browser now. If you search for UrbanCode plugins, if you just Google for UrbanCode plugins, you will probably end up at this website, plugins.urbancode.com. I've selected the IBM UrbanCode deploy plugins, and there are 59 of them in the list. And you can just go through them all alphabetically, or you can step through individually. So Helen and I from Regifor were talking a couple of days ago about a particular customer scenario. We dived in here and had a look at the support for a particular plugin, and we found the information that the customer was looking for. So it's a great site to go through. If we have a look at the application deployment for WebSphere, this lists all of the commands that are available within it, and it gives you a little comment that describes what it's going to do. So if you browse through these lists, you'll be able to see exactly the sorts of things that you can do within each of those environments. The others that are listed on here, we have various others. So let's have a quick look at one of these in messaging WebSphere MQ. So here's the MQ one that lists the various things that you just saw inside UrbanCode deploy. So the reason for showing you this on the website is that if you don't have UrbanCode deploy installed today, which I suspect you don't, then you can go to this website and have a look at the plugin support for the various different technologies that you're working with and see the sorts of commands that we have available for you. And when you have the product, you can look at them all within the product itself as well. So we can scroll through here and have a look at something like the message broker, and that shows us just the list of commands and descriptions of them that are available. So in the interest of time, let's go and do one of these deployments. I'm going to go through to application 2. I'm just going to kick off a new deployment. Now when you start a deployment, I'm going to create a queue on here. It has been run before, so I'm clearing that checkbox because UrbanCode deploy is great at understanding the inventory of what's been deployed to an environment already. And to relay a question a customer asked this morning, he said, well, if I have 10 machines in a particular environment and then I add an 11th to it and I want to deploy to the 11th, how do I do it? Well, you just add the 11th machine to the set of machines that exist within that environment, and then just go and fire off a deployment. And it will look at the previous ones and it will say, well, my inventory shows that that version has already been deployed to that particular environment, so I'll skip it, and then it will finally get to the new one and say, oh, don't have anything in inventory for that one, so I better go and deploy it. Now, there's various different ways that you can select the versions that you want to deploy. We can select them just by using a complete list of all the versions that are available. We can select by a variety of different properties, such as versions with a particular name, what's currently being deployed. You can clear the list, you can pick the latest, and so on. So there's a variety of ways that we can do that. So I'm going to redeploy version 2 of this, hit submit, and we'll see it starting off. So this is going to go through the steps that we've just been looking at through the component process a second ago. I'm going to have a look in detail at the child execution process, and you can track this as it's running. So that one is now running. If I'm quick enough, I can hit the output log monitoring before anything appears. So if you do have some long-running processes that perform multiple steps, then as that one did, you can see the information being added to the screen as it paints down the screen. No more remotely logging into particular machines to go and have a look what's going on and trying to find log files. All those log files get brought back centrally to the console here so that you can see exactly what's going on. And it is a very simple process, but to be honest, demonstrating this, it gets a bit like paint drying if you're sitting here watching processes run if you're not too careful. But what we can do now is we can have a look at what's happened. We can go and have a look at the commands that were actually executed, and we can see the outputs that we've obtained. Now, every bit of text that you're seeing in these output results, if we look at the configure Q one, that one has quite a lot of text that tells us that things have been done. You can have a post-processing script if you need one to query that, to search it for certain types of text, to go and do some comparisons so that you can be confident that the command has completely worked to your satisfaction. So you have a couple of choices really. You can either break these down into multiple tiny little steps within the component process, or you can wrap them up into one call to a command and do it in smaller number of steps, but you then have probably a little bit more work to do in terms of figuring out whether or not it's been successful or not. So really that shows you the results of the deployment, looking at what we have down there. What we've gone through today very quickly really was a quick introduction to the DevOps scenario as we see it, looking at the various components that make up an UrbanCode deploy system in terms of the applications that we want to deploy, the environments through which we deploy the application, the components that make up the application, and the detailed component processes and the way that those can take advantage of some of the plugins that have been created for various different types of technology. There's 59 plugins there that are on that list, so that there is quite a large amount for you to have a browse through on the UrbanCode website. If you have any questions about any of those, then get back to myself or Helen. And the final comment about all these plugins is that is really the big strength of the variability and the capability to turn this product into something that really fits exactly what you need. Because if a plugin doesn't exist for your technology, or you see things that you do that are not there yet in terms of what's available for a particular technology, then all the plugins are available in source code format. So in fact, they're available on the website for you to download and have a look at them. And you can take them, you can modify them, you can create your own, upload your own versions of plugins into the product as you're running it, and take advantage of that. So the world's your oyster really in terms of flexibility of that. So with that, I will let Helen know that I've pretty much finished my part.
Fabulous, thanks Mark. We do have a couple of questions actually from the audience, one for you and one for me. So the one for you is there a way to version and branch your processes so you could test out a new process?
There is certainly a way to version them. Let me just flip back to one of them. Let's go quickly into a component process. Pick anything, and there you go. You see at the top there it says 26 of 26. So I've had a few edits on this particular process, as you can see. And if I use this button, I can go back to prior versions of it. Normally you would expect to see it moving and things being removed from it as it gets older. And you can reset any version to the latest. So it's not really parallel development of the component processes. The way that you would do that, if you wanted to really, is to say, well, this create and start queue manager is pretty close to what I want, so I'm going to copy it. That's put it onto the clipboard. So I can paste that back in, and I've now got a copy of that process. So what I'd probably do next is rename the copy. I know that it's taken from that as a source, and then create a separate thread of that process development. So, my background is configuration management. It's not really parallel development of it, I appreciate, but it's pretty close to it in terms of giving you the option to create multiple processes.
Thank you, Mark. The other question was about whether we were going to make the presentation available to the people that have attended today, and the answer to that is yes. Everyone that registered for this event will receive an email early next week with a link to the recording of today's webinar and also a copy of Mark's slides. So I think that's all we've got for you for today. So thank you very much for all your time. Thank you, Mark, in particular, for all your effort today. And we look forward to speaking with you all soon.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.